Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Teresa Kittredge, and I'm the founder of 100 Real Women. And I want to thank you for joining us this morning and starting off with that great music about our big table that we want to have. So I just want to introduce you a little bit to 100 Real Women and also welcome you to just throw in the chat where you're joining us from today. We'd love to learn where everybody's coming in from today. A little bit about 100 Real Women to start us off. We are really about making connections and inspiring leadership. We see a future where rural women lead positive change for themselves, their family, their communities, the nation, and the world. And we're really committed to building leadership through networks, mentorship, education, civic engagement. So our organization, we're a 501c3. We are nonpartisan, non-issue oriented, and we're here to support rural women. So a little bit about our breakfast club. This really started when our organization launched in the spring of 2020 and COVID hit. And it was like, well, this is interesting. How are we going to move forward as an organization? And one of the first things we did was, well, we could do webinars. We could lift up women doing great work during COVID. And it's been very successful and a great way for us to connect with women and find people and places and projects that we can highlight. So again, thanks for coming today. A little bit about this project. We are just so pleased and honored to be able to work with the Humphrey students and the Humphrey School. And the whole thought behind this project was this vision of how can we build a mentorship network of rural elected women to mentor women, more women to get involved in public service. So that's really where this generated. And we put together a proposal to the Humphrey School for a capstone project. And I just want to really thank the Humphrey School. I want to thank Professor Kevin Gertis for helping me through this process. And I really want to thank these three students who you're going to meet soon for choosing us. We are just very excited and honored to be able to do this work, as I mentioned. Also, I want to thank the Blandon Foundation, because without their support, we wouldn't be able to do this work. So I just want to welcome everybody this morning. We have a lot of people coming on, and I know it's going to be a great webinar, and excited for you to learn more, and I'm excited to learn more. So I'm going to hand it over to Emma, who is our Lead for America Fellow, to take us to the next part of our webinar. Emma.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Teresa. Good morning, everyone. I am here to first and foremost welcome you. It's great to see some familiar faces. Nice to see some new ones. Remind everybody a little bit about Zoom etiquette. I know we've been doing this for, what feels like a decade now, but remember to mute yourselves, unmute at the Q&A section when we have a question. We want to have an active chat today. So please, as questions come up for you, drop them in the chat. There will be plenty of time for us to sift through. And just make sure to be respectful and give our presenters your full attention, because I know how hard they've been working. And I am going to, with that, introduce them. So first presenting today, we have Naa Korkoi Larmie, who is an international student at the U of M in the Master of the Human Rights program with a concentration on children's rights and education. Together with her team, she's working on a capstone project that identifies barriers to rural women running for an elected position and supports that are available for these women. Next, we have Delaney Stekr. Delaney Stekr, also a graduate student at the U of M, working on this project, who's pursuing a master's in public policy, focusing on election administration and working on applying to law school. Her undergrad degree was also from the U of M in political science and history. Next, we have Caitlyn Walker, who is also in the Master's of Public Policy program at the U of M, focusing on local governance and policy. And she is working on this as part of her graduate studies capstone project. And the three of them are fantastic. I have gotten the privilege of getting to know them over the past couple of months or so, and I'm just so excited to hear what they have for us today. So I will hand it off to Caitlyn and just give them your full attention.
Good morning. Thank you, Emma. Thank you all for joining us today to learn about our findings from our research into the barriers, breakthroughs, and backbone of rural elected women. We wanted to start off with a quote from one of our interviewees that encapsulates some of the barriers women face and highlights the desire to help more women attain leadership roles. She said, "I feel there are so many inadequacies for women out there regarding pay, regarding respect, regarding knowledge. I've seen it over the years, and I really want to encourage young women to pursue their careers in leadership roles." Now to introduce ourselves again, I'm Caitlyn Walker.
Hi, I'm Delaney Stekr.
Hi, I'm Naa Korkoi Larmie.
Today's presentation will cover the following agenda. We will introduce our project, explain our research questions and how we conducted our research. We will share our results and recommendations. We'll acknowledge the limitations of our research and then have time for questions. To introduce our research, we wanted to start off with a few key points. First, we all know that women make up over half of the population. However, women do not represent 50% of elected officials. For example, the Minnesota legislature is only 31.8% women, and women are even less represented at lower levels of government. It's important that women are represented in government so that different perspectives and experiences are represented. Additionally, women oftentimes have different leadership styles than men and are often perceived to be more compassionate and better problem solvers than their male counterparts. It's also important to support rural women specifically because rural women oftentimes have less access to infrastructure, opportunities for paid employment, and access to services, among other barriers that make it difficult to attain leadership roles. As many of you know, 100 Rural Women is a nonprofit organization seeking to address these problems and to help support rural women into leadership positions. 100 Rural Women tasked us with interviewing elected women to better understand their journey to elected office in order to support new women in their journey to elected office. We were also tasked with learning about what types of supports and what type of mentorship activities would be beneficial to help get more women elected into office. Next, we'll cover the research questions that we used to guide our project. First, we looked at what are the motivators and barriers to women who have ran for elected office. Second, what supports exist and which are most effective for elected rural women. And third, what are the specific barriers to rural women compared to urban women when thinking about running for elected office. To begin our research, we started with conducting a literature review to better understand what the literature states on the barriers and supports for women seeking elected office and what the literature says about the role mentorship plays in supporting women into leadership roles. Some of the barriers explored in the literature include sexism, the persistence of the good old boys club, motherhood responsibilities, the lack of female political role models. The literature also finds that mentorship is an effective tool to help women and is most effective when participants are motivated to participate. Next, we conducted interviews with elected women in roles at all levels of government across the state. In total, we conducted 19 interviews, each lasting approximately 45 to 75 minutes via Zoom. We also interviewed some formally elected officials and one peer organization that also works to support women running into office to better understand the urban versus rural barriers. The types of offices represented in our interview sample include mayor, city council member, hospital and school board members, county commissioners, sheriffs, tribal representatives, state senators, state house representatives, and county attorneys. So we've got a broad range of perspectives included in our interview sample. We asked each woman about 10 interview questions, and we kept these consistent throughout the interviews. These are the questions that are most closely related to the findings that we will be presenting momentarily. They include what got you interested in running for office, what supports exist to support you in your role, what are the biggest barriers you faced and how did you overcome them, how do your identities impact your work, and how would you design a support network for rural women seeking elected office. After the interviews were complete, we conducted a thematic data analysis by analyzing all of the interviews for common themes. We did this through a process of triangulation as to minimize analysis bias. In practice, this meant that one team member conducted the interview, A different team member reviewed the audio and transcript of the interview to write notes about the interview that omitted any personally identifiable information about the interviewee. And then we all reviewed those summary notes to identify common themes independently and then aggregated our notes as a group. Now Delaney will start with sharing our research results and findings.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Moving into our themes that we found, the first theme that we're going to look at is what motivated women to run for office. And this quote was something that we felt summarized the feelings pretty well. I honestly think the reason I ran ultimately at the end of the day is that I don't feel like I am being represented. I don't think a lot of women are being represented. So specifically looking into these motivators, a lot of women felt that they wanted to facilitate change in their community. They didn't feel that the elected body, like that quote reflected, was representative of them. And a lot of women were asked to run by others or previously elected officials, and that kind of statistic of women have to be asked 7 times to run was something that we heard a lot of women kind of anecdotally cite. And the timing was also right for a lot of these women. It was a very calculated decision for them. It wasn't something they just thought about and then acted on. And across all of these motivators, most interviewees mentioned that they did not feel that they were qualified for the job. And that was something that they felt like held them back from being able to run for office. And so moving into our next theme, the existing supports that women have while they are in office currently. And this quote was one that touched on that. I got on the board with a group of very smart, very strong, and very experienced ladies. They took me under their wing and they kind of molded me. And so looking at the other supports that women found, there are many formal organizations that exist, but those organizations provide limited support. And that's specifically due to the fact that rural women have a very unique set of issues that they deal with, and the setting that they're working in is also unique. And those organizations just don't potentially have the resources to be able to provide the support that rural women need. The informal supports are what we found was most critical for these women, and that came from whether it was friends and family providing them support outside of the job, or it was campaign managers or previously elected mentors or mentors in general providing them advice and giving them a space where they felt that they could confidently confide in these people and they could get advice that they really respected. And with a lot of rural positions in elected office, the jobs are sometimes part-time. And so having flexibility with other jobs that they may have, or having support with taking care of children or things like that, was something that was really key to them. And again, having experienced informal support, so having that staff that's already in place was something that was very helpful for them, that could kind of show them the ropes of how their office worked once they were first in office. And then moving into our next theme, looking at the barriers that women face specifically. I think my biggest barrier was getting the support that I felt I needed to pull this off and to make this work. People of color, minorities, have to do twice the convincing to show that they were a credible candidate, and I did not even feel I had the initial support that I needed. And so, and kind of noting on that quote, the majority of the women that we were able to interview were white, and so that quote really kind of exemplifies that while there aren't a lot of women in office, there are particularly not a lot of minority women in office, and that's just something important to note of particular barriers to women of color. And kind of like Caitlyn noted in our literature review, that we kind of confirmed that the Good Old Boys Club is still a barrier that women face. And even when women do get into office, the lack of having other female voices in the room makes it difficult for them to have their voices heard. And also, once women finally do make that decision to run for office, there is limited knowledge on campaign basics, or particularly campaign financing was something that a lot of interviewees mentioned was something that was a struggle for them and kind of kept them from running. And one very common experience that particularly mothers had when they were planning on running was having their qualifications questioned, and particularly their commitment or their availability to be able to fill the office because they were a mother. And that's not a question that any of their male counterparts were receiving. And so that was definitely a frustration for a lot of women. And in small towns, I think that a lot of the women mentioned that people want to see specifically the candidate. And so they felt like they had to do a lot of work on their own and there wasn't a ton of support from other people. And again, kind of with smaller towns, community credibility was something that women struggled with, particularly when everyone in the town had known them and they'd grown up with them and they didn't feel like they saw them as maybe a little girl instead of someone who was able to fulfill an elected office position. And across the board, whether a woman was a mother or not, having a balance between their work and their home life was something that women struggled with, particularly in the beginning of their career. I think some women kind of figured it out as they went through, but elected office demands a lot out of women, and it's difficult to be able to kind of strike that balance between personal life and work life. And so I think I will pass it on to Naa for the rest of our results.
Thank you, Delaney. So getting into the next quote about the impact of their identities to their positions, one interviewee mentioned that I think that my identity as a woman and as a mother probably affects my politics the most. They're the things I tend to focus on. So getting into that, most of the interviews that we spoke to mentioned that they feel that their identity or their gender or their race makes them more relatable with the people in their community or their constituents. Some also shared that based on like their various perspectives, they felt that they had knowledge or they were subject matter experts based on certain issues. For example, if it had to do with a school board, most likely being a mother in that, being a mother or a parent of the students in that school gave them in-depth issues into the things that were happening in the school as compared to other people on the board who weren't parents. And then sometimes they share that their identity makes it difficult for their constituents to support them as well, because sometimes they had such varying points of view that it was difficult to connect their ideas with other members in their communities. And then they also shared that their identity and their values was really a guiding philosophy for them, because if they believe strongly in teamwork, it was really what they counted on to determine how they worked with other people on the board or whichever committee they were in. And the fact that also that their identity also impacted the things they prioritize. So for example, if the elected official is a mother or if the elected official is a woman, well, which they all were, is kind of help them prioritize the things they felt that their constituents needed to kind of work on and things that needed to be worked on first. And going into the rural barriers that we found unique to the elected women we spoke to, this was one quote that was shared. You know, even to the nuances of what it means to be talking about roads and bridges, roads in the urban versus bridges in rural. You are still talking infrastructure, but you might be talking more transit in the urban areas than you are in rural areas. So the issues are definitely a big part of it, and the tactics are slightly different. So in this particular section, the interviewees that we spoke to mentioned that in their small communities, they have, so in the case if they had grown up in that community, everybody knew them, and sometimes people knew their grandparents all the way to like the first generation, so it was easier for them to get the votes they wanted. But on the other hand, because they knew them, they did not regard them even as they were campaigning for that position, or even when they got into the position, people still kind of didn't have that respect for them, which was a real barrier. And then for some of the interviewees, they mentioned that even though they had moved into some of the communities for over 10 years, they were still regarded as an outsider. And that was kind of difficult for them in kind of penetrating the community to like run for campaigns and get the support they needed to run for the campaigns, and even while they were in elected positions. And there's the issue of also compensation, meaning that in rural communities, the compensation is lower than in urban communities. So even if a single parent wanted to run for an elected office, it would be difficult for that person to do so, because the person would not be compensated enough to be able to take on the elected position full time, and trying to like manage or juggle other jobs would be difficult to do while trying to parent. And then it was also made mention during the interviews that they are just like a specific or a unique set of issues that are just focused on like elected women in rural areas that are not the same for women in urban areas. That makes it also a challenge for them in their campaigning of elected position, and even while they are in the elected office. And the issue of physical distance, sometimes when they are campaigning, moving from one house to another is quite a long distance, and it's so tiring and it's so challenging for them, even as they are going around to campaign and go door to door also to campaign for votes. So then we go into our recommendations, which I'm sure everybody is excited to hear about. So let's get into it. So recommendations based on all the things that Caitlyn and Delaney have shared are in twofold, based on the feedback and the stories that the interviewees shared with us. So based on the first portion of our recommendation is the gaps we found in the existing supports, right? So that's what we say that the supports that the women need. So mostly, so what we're trying to recommend that 100 rural women consider moving forward is for women who are running or thinking about running for elected position, they would need support in managing the finances that are involved, and financing like their campaigns, which banks to go to that would willingly work with women who are trying to like raise funds for their campaigns, and how to even budget for like their campaigns, the basic things when it comes to like managing the finances in the campaigns from the beginning to end. They would need support for that, and basic campaign how-tos based on the conversations and the stories as the women shared. They all would also need support on like basic campaign how-tos, like which counties would require like door knocking, and where would make sense to do more of like a social media campaign, or like where they need their professional photos to be taken, and all those sorts of things that would help make the campaign process easier. And then finally, which something I found really interesting was that some of the elected women shared that even as they even as they won the campaigns and they got into the elected position, they still lacked the basic skills they needed to do their jobs efficiently. So one person mentioned that her best friend at that moment was Google, because she quickly went to Google how to do something, and that was how she's been managing to stay on top of tasks. So we're suggesting that for women who are in that, who are in elected positions, some sort of insights and guidance on how to do their jobs will be really helpful. And which leads us to our final set of recommendations based on that one, mostly because based on what the interviewee shared, or what the interviewee shared, having a mentorship network would really be helpful in making sure that they are able to do their tasks efficiently and not completely rely on Google. And so based on that, we are recommending that 100 rural women consider hosting virtual and in-person events for women who are either thinking about campaigning for elected positions or are in elected positions. And we are suggesting virtual and or in-person because some of the elected women are new mothers, and some are mothers who have to deal with like picking up their kids from school and all those sorts of things. So having the option to join virtually would be helpful because they'll be able to take part and also benefit from whatever is shared during those meetings. And some also shared that having the in-person elements of it would help them connect more with other women in elected positions. And then another point is facilitating informal meetings so that they can build that trust, so that they can also kind of network and connect with other women in various counties who are in similar like elected positions would really be helpful, because they can be able to share like their similar like struggles and the way they overcame it, and help them build that sort of like bond and connection that they need to have like that support system that would help them do what they need to do in their various positions. Because as my colleagues mentioned, most of the time, women in elected positions find that like whichever position they're in to be very lonely. So having that support would also be very helpful for them. And then that's network meeting, or that informal meeting, should not just only be like a big group, but then one-on-one, for them to also kind of build that kind of mentor-mentee kind of relationship as well as their own time. And that would also be useful to them, because they wouldn't have to, some people also say they wouldn't have to also network with the large group, but then having that one-on-one will be useful for them. And then we also suggest that we should 100 Rural Women consider facilitating experience sharing between women, especially women within the same kind of fields, because they've based on the conversations we've had and the stories that they shared, having women who have already been in your position or are currently in your position, you are able to learn some skills, or the way one person mentioned that how to even get their point across when they have a board that's full of men. So how do you say it in such a way that you are taken seriously? Having that platform to share with women who are in a similar situation or who are in the same kind of situation would be helpful to them. And then one other thing was that in like the existing supports that my colleagues mentioned, they mentioned that having like someone who has already been in that position before was really helpful to them. So we ask, or we suggest that you leverage on that, having like elected women who are in that position connect with women who are also thinking about campaigning for a similar position as well, would be really helpful in the long run. And then we also said our last point is that 100 Rural Women should be willing to accommodate the different schedules of like all the women that want to be part of the mentorship program. Because after our interviews and after our conversations, every single person that we interviewed shared interest in the mentorship program. So then it should be taken into account that everybody has like different schedules. So whichever or whatever kind of mentorship program that 100 Rural Women design should take into account that everybody is running on different schedules as well. So I've chewed your ears with a lot of the recommendations. I would share the limitations that my team and I encountered as we're going through the entire project. So as I mentioned, the schedules of the elected officials can be really busy. So it was also for us trying to nail down some elected officials. It was really difficult because everybody had so many things on their plates. It was really like a struggle for us to get the people to kind of commit to a time. And we're really grateful for all the women that did commit to the time. And another point of our limitations was that there was a time constraint on our project. Given the chance to continue this project, would have been able to reach a wider number of women and speak to a wider range of issues. But unfortunately, we had a short time to kind of make sure that we get as much useful and needed information all crammed up within the time frame that we had. And unfortunately, even though we reached out to a wide number of elected officials, not everybody was able to get back to us because of, as I mentioned, their busy schedules. And then another thing that should be taken into account, that the mentorship suggestions were based on individual preferences. So for every interviewee that we spoke to, everybody shared what they thought would work best for them. So that should also be taken into consideration. And also the fact that the information that we gathered and everything that we shared is Minnesota specific as well. And then finally, as my colleagues mentioned, most of our interviewees were white. So that should also take into consideration as you design a mentorship network or whichever supports network for the elected women in rural Minnesota. So then we want to wrap up our presentation with a huge thank you to 100 Rural Women, the entire team, Teresa, Delaney, Emma, thank you so much for your support and for sharing all the resources and being available to meet us almost every 2 weeks to share and kind of brainstorm how our projects are going. And also would like to say a big thank you to our Professor Kevin Gerdes. Hi, thank you so much for all your support and being there for us whenever we had any questions, and always being willing to like respond to our emails. Thank you so much. And to all the women that volunteered their time to speak with us, we really appreciate you, and we think you are so brave and so bold, and you are doing such a terrific job. And it was such a pleasure talking to all of you. Thank you so much for your time. So here are a list of resources that we use to support the data that we presented the work today.